Hi everyone. Again, my name is Morrigan. I'm really happy to be presenting this topic tonight, and I'll let you in on a little secret. This is my first time presenting it. I started with AC back in February, and I am based out of Las Vegas, Nevada. Um, I really got interested in the desert through birding, and my background is in environmental education and English. So I'm so happy and grateful that Naomi is able to join us tonight. If anyone has really pressing botany questions that I can't answer, I will definitely hand them off to you, Naomi. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So if you've never heard of Amargosa Conservancy or you're not super familiar with us, that is okay. I've got you covered. So we are a nonprofit dedicated to conserving the Amargosa River Basin, all the way from Beatty, Nevada to Badwater Basin in Death Valley, California. We're involved with a lot of different projects, including advocacy to protect the resources out here in the river basin, as well as monitoring programs, and of course, the stewardship that I am a part of. So I'm going to set you up for success tonight by first going through where the Amargosa River is, what alkali wetlands even are, before we dive into some of the grant work that my organization has been collaborating with the California Botanic Garden on. And then we'll also go over some of those grant activities in more detail, like the seed banking and some of the endangered species that we are working with. And then lastly, of course, there will be time for questions at the very end. So let's put our imagination hats on and time travel back not too long ago, only about 18,000 years ago, to the Pleistocene era, aka the last ice age, when this whole region was wet and lush. As you can see on this map here, the Amargosa River Basin was dominated by these giant Pleistocene lakes. If you were in Tacoma or Shoshone or Death Valley, um, the landscape would have been a lot greener than what we see today. You may have encountered ancient mammoths walking around, or perhaps even ancient camels, or maybe saber-toothed cats. Um, there's still a lot of work to be done on the paleontology front, but these are some animals that we know from the fossil record were either roaming around the Amargosa River Basin or just in the Mojave as a whole. And then, of course, the ancestors of some of the species that we see today were existing back then too. So the most locally famous example would be the ancestors of the different species of pupfish that were found or that are found today in the Amargosa River. So these pupfish ancestors, over time, as the climate got dry and the lakes shrank, they became isolated from one another, and then different species speciated and became their own separate species. So today there are 6 species of pupfish out in the Amargosa River Basin, including the Devil's Hole pupfish, the Shoshone pupfish, the Amargosa pupfish in Ash Meadows. And a very similar thing happened to the Amargosa vole, which is now one of the most endangered mammals on Earth because it is only found in the marshes around Tacoma and Shoshone. And then, of course, because this is a botany presentation, right? Perhaps a similar thing occurred to this plant called the Tacoma bird's beak. But actually, California Botanic Garden is doing some really interesting genetic research to see how the Tacoma bird's beak even ended up where it is in the Amargosa, because its nearest relatives in its genus, Chloropyron, are found in similar salty habitats on the coast of California, Baja, and up in Utah too. So, with all that being said, today the Amargosa River is mostly underground. In this map, you can see where the river flows by following that black line. Again, our organization is focused on conserving the Amargosa River right from Beatty to Badwater because that's where the river flows. But this blue here on the map represents the greater underground aquifer and hydrologic resource in the region. So the Amargosa River, like I said, flows mostly underground, and sometimes I've heard it called the Peekaboo River or even the hide and seek river because of how elusive it is. It's like it's there in one place and then it's not. So it's hidden unless you know where to look, right? Because a lot of different habitats can indicate whether or not there is water present. So, for example, um, if you're just driving through the region, it might seem at first glance like it's very, very dry. But if you actually get out of your car and walk around in some of these alkali wetlands, you'll find that there is some shallow groundwater there. You might slip, you might see little mud puddles. Um, so the water is definitely there. And then another vegetation community that's not the focus of this presentation, but also very important are these mesquite woodlands, which indicate that there is groundwater present. The mesquite is a tree that grows throughout the Mojave Desert, and it is capable of extending a taproot 200 feet down below the surface of the earth to reach that water. So mesquites are also able to provide really important resources for a lot of migrating birds, a lot of insects and small mammals. So again, they are a habitat that if you encounter, you know there is water nearby, although in that case, the water might be quite deep below the surface of the earth. And of course, we are not in the Pleistocene anymore. Our climate today is very different. It's hot and it's dry, as you can see on this precipitation graph here. If you're a true desert rat like me, you kind of pride yourself on being able to withstand these hot and dry conditions. But you can imagine that in the Pleistocene, all of the water that was charging up the aquifer from rain and snowmelt, it still remains there today. So now the water that emerges from some of these springs at Ash Meadows or seeps along the river can be dated back thousands and thousands of years ago. Um, to the snowmelt and the precipitation of the Pleistocene. So that's something that just continues to blow my mind. Just to think that the biodiversity we see in these areas is owed because of a climate that we can barely even fathom today. So we call these habitats alkali wetlands, right? But what exactly does that mean? So first, let's clarify what a wetland is. A wetland is an area that is wet, hence the name. So it's either saturated with water seasonally or year-round. So then an alkali wetland is a wetland that has a very high mineral or pH content in the soil. In this case, it would be salt. And in the Amargosa River Basin, a lot of the soils are very salty just because of the geology. And these wetlands occur because when the Amargosa River does surface, it pushes up all of these minerals and then it evaporates very quickly and leaves those minerals behind. So as you can imagine, these plants have to have very specialized adaptations to deal with that salty soil content. So here are a couple photos out in the Amargosa to visualize what these alkali wetlands may look like. As you can see, sometimes they do have surface water that's being expressed, or perhaps there was a recent rain event. And then in this picture on the right, you can really see how thick that salt crust can be. Um, it is really probably hard for a lot of plants to grow through that because it's so thick and they have to puncture, right, the salt to be able to grow up and out of the earth. Here's even more salt. I really like walking around in these habitats. The salt forms like these beautiful patterns, and your boots crunch and crack. And personally, I just really love the sound that it makes when we're walking around out here doing plant surveys. This is from an area called the Carson Slough near Ash Meadows, which we will revisit later in the presentation. Just remember that it's very crunchy out there. And then sometimes alkali wetlands look a little bit more marshy in what you would imagine a wetland to look like. So these photos were taken around Ash Meadows and around Tacopa. Here, the soil is still very dry, but there might be a little bit more surface water present. The plants that are out there are growing up a little bit taller. And so these alkali wetlands are really their own micro universes of plant life. And when you really slow down to look at the plants and just observe anything else that's present, any birds or insects, it has its own rhythm. And the plants that grow in these wetlands, like I said, they have to be very specialized. This is not a habitat for your house plants, right? So they're adapted to cope with, of course, the salty soil, the extreme heat, the constant or near constant sunlight, and then the lack of rainfall. So some of the adaptations that these plants might have are shallow roots to reach the groundwater table, because in many parts of the Amargosa River Basin, in these alkali wetlands, the water table is actually pretty high. Um, and so some of these plants even have wide root systems that helps them spread out and find water. Sometimes these plants have special pores on their leaves that actually secrete salt. And when you touch them, like a little bit of salt comes off, it tastes salty, and it's just a really interesting way that they cope with that. And then a lot of these plants tend to be pretty pale in color, and that may be an adaptation to help them deflect that intense UV radiation. And then obviously these plants have to reproduce at some point. So their flowers might be bright yellow or pink or purple to signal to pollinators that are out here to come and collect pollen and help them reproduce. So you see that really strongly in these super bloom years. This year it's a little bit more subdued because we don't have a super bloom, but it's still just incredibly beautiful when you're out there. So, because the conditions are so harsh and because of the unique way that the Pleistocene climate changed into our contemporary climate, a lot of speciation occurred. So, just like we talked about earlier with the pupfish and the Amargosa vole and the Tacopa bird's beak, this was happening to a variety of species. So, the end result of a speciation is what we call endemism. That's when a plant becomes endemic or it's found nowhere else in the world. So the Amargosa River Basin has a lot of endemic species for its desert climate. Um, I think, yeah, there's about 50 total endemic species that are found within the river basin. And then of that 15, 12 of those are endemic plants, and 7 of them are listed under the Endangered Species Act. And that's because, they're growing in these really isolated and harsh conditions, and they don't have a wide range. So because of that, they're very sensitive to any further changes in their life. And so many more are also of conservation concern for those same reasons. So some of the rare species that are out in the Amargosa include the Amargosa niterwort, which we will circle back to towards the end of this presentation. and the Tacopa bird's beak, which I talked a little bit about earlier, as well as the spring-loving centaury and the Ash Meadows lady's tresses. The Tacopa bird's beak is one that is currently under review to be potentially listed under the Endangered Species Act. The Center for Biological Diversity is really trying to get this listed because it would offer this species and the habitat, the alkali wetlands, more protection from resource extraction and things like that. And so a lot of these species, like I said, they're rare, and so they face more threats than maybe some of these common plant species do. But there hasn't been a whole lot of restoration work done in alkali wetlands in the Mojave Desert. So this is what kind of prompted my organization and the California Botanic Garden, as well as others, to apply for a grant from the state of California's Wildlife Conservation Board to help conserve and restore the alkali wetlands that are found out here. So I'm very happy to say we obviously got the grant, otherwise I wouldn't be here tonight with you all. We received this grant last fall, and we are now working on these 6 tasks for the next 3 years or so. So we'll be doing seed collections of common and rare species. We will be working alongside the Timbisha Shoshone tribe to create a cultural seed bank. We'll be doing more work with the Amargosa niterwort. We will be, or we will have published a botanical inventory by the end of all of this, which will be a comprehensive checklist of all the species that are found on the California side of the Amargosa River Basin. And we'll also be doing some ongoing hydrological monitoring out in the Carson Slough and continuing to engage with the community and offer presentations like this to both locals and people who maybe only visit the Amargosa River Basin. So, of course, all restoration work has to begin with seeds. But let's break down just how incredible seeds really are, because I honestly took for granted just how complex they are until recently when I visited the California Botanic Gardens seed bank, which I'll get to in a little bit, and it blew my mind. So within every seed, right, there has to be an embryo, and that embryo contains the very beginnings of new growth for the plant. So it has maybe a little bit of root and leaf and a stem ready to go. And then alongside of that embryo is storage tissue, and that contains the really essential nutrients that that embryo needs to grow. So that would be things like starches and oils and proteins. And then it's all wrapped up in a little package that is the seed that we see. Um, the desert seeds take this to a whole new level. Desert seeds tend to have very thick seed coats, and that is helping them protect those embryos from drying out or from any other damage. So, because deserts are so fickle with how much rain we get every year, this is a very important adaptation for these plants to survive years and years, maybe without the right rain and precipitation to grow. So, some desert seeds can survive decades in dormancy, like this creosote here. Generally, they have very long dormancies for that reason. When you see a super bloom, when it's a super bloom year, these are species that are called annuals, and they essentially they're like Fast and the Furious, like they grow up so fast and they produce a ton of seeds in just a couple of months, and then they die off. And then those seeds go into the earth and they wait for the next right conditions of rain and cool temperatures. So generally, all the desert plant species are kind of operating on their own version of that. And then at the California Botanic Garden, which is located in Claremont, near or in the LA area. There is a very special place called the Seed Bank, and it is tucked away off of the main trails of the garden. And there, the staff take care of thousands of seeds for future restoration work. They have seeds in their seed bank, not just from desert habitats, but also mountains and forests. And they actually have the largest seed collection dedicated to California's native plants. And then these are just some of the things that the seed bank does. So they help with active restoration projects in California. They obviously store the seeds for long-term use. They do germination testing to better understand how different plants germinate and in what conditions. And then they distribute seeds with their partners as well. So many alkali wetland plants have not actually been collected before. So we're working with a very blank slate of seed collections out here, and it's a super exciting opportunity for that reason. So the first step in getting seed collections is to, of course, know where the plants are. And so we've started scouting out a few different sites along the Amargosa River to collect seeds from different plants. We were out in April around Tacopa. We've been out around Ash Meadows as well. And this is really going to help us get a baseline to collect the seeds this fall and to start working on that. And then our overall goal with the seed collections is to have seeds from 38 different target species. As you can see in this table here, these are just a few of those species. We want to have 50 total seed collections by the end of the year. And then our goal for the end of this fall is to have 10 of those seed collections ready to go. And we'll start working on that in September. So stay tuned for any updates. So after we collect the seeds, they will go back to California Botanic Garden with Naomi, and they'll be placed in short-term storage and long-term storage collections to support future restoration. So the team at CalBG will sift and clean the seeds and remove any extra debris before putting them into their respective categories. The short-term category is for like upcoming restoration projects, and then the long-term storage is for just indefinite storage for the future. And there'll also be a small amount sent to a backup facility in case, worst case scenario happened. But the most important thing is to keep the seeds healthy, which means keeping them dry and cool. So the seeds are put into these big refrigerators, and there's also special dehumidifying equipment at CalBG to remove any excess moisture. And routinely, the staff will go and perform checkups on the seeds. And what that means is they will essentially cut open a seed and look at the embryo and make sure it's still healthy. And they may also perform some germination testing to see under what conditions we can get these seeds to grow for those future restoration projects. And that's a very important step for this restoration work because, like I said, a lot of these species haven't been used in restoration before. So we don't know exactly what right germination protocol that they will need. So another really exciting aspect of our grant work is that we are collaborating with the Timbisha Shoshone tribe, who are the ancestral stewards of the whole Amargosa River Basin and currently live in their homeland at Furnace Creek. We are going to help them establish their own cultural seed bank, and we're having conversations with them right now to figure out what species they want us to help them collect and where they want those seeds to be stored. That might be at CalBG, or that might be us helping them get the right equipment to store at Furnace Creek. This is one of the species they would like conserved. It's the yerba mansa, which is a really important plant for wetland restoration because it helps stabilize a lot of soils. And then another target species that they would like to seed bank is the arrowweed. And the arrowweed is really important ecologically for pollinators that are attracted to these really bright purplish pink flowers. And the arrowweed grows in very tall, dense stands in these wetlands along the Amargosa River. It's also a very important nectaring plant for monarch butterflies. And there are small numbers of monarchs that pass through the Amargosa River Basin on their way to and from their wintering grounds in coastal California. And then perhaps the most locally famous species that the Timbisha would like to collect is the honey mesquite. So I could give a whole separate presentation on this one plant species because it has numerous ecological and cultural uh, values. But the very short version is that this plant species is so important for so many migrating birds and breeding birds, as well as so many small mammals and reptiles and insects. And then the Timbisha Shoshone historically used these seed pods as a really important staple in their diet. So you can grind up the seed pods and make a flour out of it to create cakes. And I've learned in conversation with some of the tribe that different honey mesquites have their own different little flavor. They're all pretty sweet. And a really cool thing with this grant project is they want to conserve some of the honey mesquites that are actually at Furnace Creek that go generations back of them collecting seeds from and using. So we're really excited to be working with them on that. And then on our end, the kind of poster child of this restoration grant is a very teeny tiny little plant called the Amargosa niterwort. This is an endemic and endangered plant. It's listed both on the federal level and the state level as endangered. It has a very limited range. This is the map here where you can see everywhere in the world that it grows. And it only grows on these very specific salty habitats where there is shallow groundwater present and where the surface of the earth in some places is actually a little bit raised on these mounds. So it only grows about 2 inches off of the ground, like I said. I wasn't exaggerating when I said it's very tiny. Um, and not a lot is known about how it actually reproduces. One theory is that little ants help it pollinate. They may go into these pink flowers that you can see in this picture, but we don't really know for sure. But what we do know about this plant is that it is rhizomatous, meaning that it grows from a central root system underground and grows up in different little clumps. And then it also has very shallow roots that are accessing that groundwater. And it is a perennial plant. So it grows in the spring, it has new growth in the spring, it flowers in the summer, and then it shrivels up and dies back a little bit and goes dormant in the winter. And then it does that again the next spring. So we talk about the niterwort being a very resilient plant because it grows where very few other plants can. It's like if alkali wetlands are hard to grow in as it is, the niterwort is like the champion. They are able to grow right where the soil is so salty. But that also means they are pretty sensitive to any further changes because they're already living on the edge. So the biggest threat to niterwort would probably be groundwater decline as a whole. And then because there is only so much water to go around, any further hydrological alteration could negatively impact the niterwort as well. So that might look like something like a mining exploration project where if a company came in and drilled exploratory holes to look for their mineral, they could potentially hit groundwater, and that would cause the water to well up, and then that would alter the flow of the water underground and could potentially cause water further off in an alkali wetland to dry up. So all of these actions to the water table have a whole network of reactions out here. And then, of course, climate change is a threat to the niter wort, like it is with every species, because again, it's already living on its edge. So any further conditions where it gets hotter and drier could negatively impact it. And then lastly, of course, the niter wort is impacted by recreation. But this is where we have maybe the most um, like capability for impact with the community, because this is where we can educate people on responsible recreation and just let people know that this plant exists. So where we're seeing this recreation threat and then this new opportunity is especially around Tacopa. So the niter wort grows around the Tacopa Hot Springs area, which is very popular. Maybe some of you on the call have been out there for soaking and for camping and off-roading. And like I said, a lot of people just don't know that this plant is out here. So every year we go out to assess the population and see kind of how it's doing from year to year. This involves going out in the summer when it's hot, but we're out there pretty early, so it's not too hot yet, and laying out these transects, which are like big squares, and counting all of the individual plants in the transect, and then recording that data. So because the plants are rhizomatous, we count them in clumps, and some squares of transects might have one or zero plants, but then others could have like 100. So it's really like a boom or bust of niter wort out there. And then, so like I was talking about earlier, another really exciting opportunity from this grant is that we can put in interpretive signage to teach people about the niter wort around Tacopa. And this will help teach locals and tourists alike, and hopefully help mitigate the impact of people going off of non-designated routes and things like that. So our vision is to have interpretive panels in the area about the niter wort and alkali wetlands and how to recreate responsibly. And then we also do want to fence off some of the vulnerable populations of niter wort. So we're working and starting to build relationships with local community business owners, like around the Tacopa Hot Springs, just to start those conversations and get everyone on board. And then a little bit more remote of a spot for the niter wort that we monitor is out in the Carson Slough, which I mentioned earlier. This is a spring discharge area near Ash Meadows Wildlife Refuge, and you actually drive by it if you're on the road from Pahrump to Death Valley Junction. So out here um, is the densest population of Amargosa niter wort. Um, and our surveying method has to be a little bit different because there are so many plants out here. So we still set up transects and count the individual plants, but we lay out a line and only count plants on one side of the line. And we also measure them out here as well to get data on their growth and see how they're doing. So I love it out here. This is where, like I was talking about earlier, especially when I'm out here, it's just so quiet and it's so just very still out there. So it's a really great area. And I'm lucky to spend time out here pretty regularly, not even just for the niter wort, but of course it's very connected. So I go out here to conduct groundwater monitoring, and we have They're called piezometers, scattered out throughout the Carson Slough. They look like these big tubes. And I go out there and I essentially stick a tape measure down the tube and it buzzes when it reaches groundwater. And then I pull it out and I record the depth of that groundwater. So it's usually a couple feet below the surface. And I'm building off of years of data doing this. This is something the Amargosa Conservancy has done for a few years now. But it's been written into this grant to continue to do this. And this really helps us understand the connection between the niter wort and the groundwater. So, like I was saying earlier, the niter wort has these shallow roots that help it grow. And by us like understanding the levels of the groundwater depth, we're able to see how healthy the niter wort can be and monitor any major fluctuations. But so far, it's been pretty stable, which is good. So there's still a lot that we don't know about the Amargosa niter wort. So for example, in this picture, this is a new population that we discovered in the field near the Tecopa Hot Springs back in April. And this was the first time that this plant was documented growing on a hillside, so a new habitat that we didn't know it could grow on. And it was also the southernmost population of niterwort that's been documented. So very exciting, a lot of opportunity for new discovery with this species. And the next steps of this restoration grant, which involved actually actively restoring the niter wort around the Tecopa hot springs, are going to be very experimental because we just really don't know yet what will work and what won't. But we do want to outplant and propagate some seeds from this plant to help boost that population that's super vulnerable right now in Tecopa. So we don't know yet if this will best be done by actually outplanting or if just fencing off the plants will help it recover. We also don't know if the best time of year to outplant would be in the winter or the spring. So definitely stay tuned because as we kind of discover this as we go along, we'll be sharing information. Because like I said, this has never been done before. And then lastly tonight, I just wanted to share a little bit of good news with you all on the alkali wetland front. So recently, a few weeks ago, the Amargosa Conservancy was able to purchase a property in Tecopa by a landowner who's very supportive of our organization. And this property has a very healthy population of the Tecopa birdsbeak, which, like I said earlier, could potentially be listed under the Endangered Species Act. So really good we're able to conserve this plant. And then the outflow from this property feeds into the Tecopa Marsh, where the endangered Amargosa vole lives. So this is just another really great piece of habitat connectivity in the alkali wetland puzzle that is the Amargosa River Basin. So we're super happy about this. And then Scott mentioned this earlier, but if what I said about mining and groundwater alteration really piqued your interest, I suggest tuning into Mason's presentation next month. He'll go over all about the advocacy that's being done in the Amargosa. This is a really great one if you have questions about how to get involved. He will be a really great resource for you. And then because summer isn't really over out here until October, our summer seminar continues into October with Scott's presentation about some more restoration work with a different grant and with some other partners that we're doing out in the river basin. And then just here are some acknowledgements, some of our partners that are helping us make all of this happen. Big thank you tonight if anyone is on the call. And yeah, here's my email and Naomi's email if any of you have questions, but it looks like we do have some time right now for questions. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Morrigan. That was super interesting. I got a couple questions in the chat, and feel free to keep putting them in there as we get working through them. Um, Angelo asked, does the unique harsh environment slash characteristics of Amargosa River make it less susceptible to invasive species?
Great question. Naomi, do you want to take this one?
Sure, yeah, I could take this question. Well, in certain habitats, we do have problems with invasive species. For instance, in the riparian areas, which do have alkali influence, we have a big problem with salt cedar or the tamarisk species. But in the alkali flats that Morrigan was talking about, where the Amargosa nidawort lives and Tacopa birdsbeak, there are actually no invasive species that we have documented occurring in those habitats. And I think it's because they're very salty, very alkaline, and just not a lot of plants are adapted to that particular habitat. And so very grateful that invasive species that are adapted to these habitats haven't found themselves in the Amargosa or hitched a ride into our habitats. So they are sort of uniquely resilient to invasion. One, because they're fairly intact, but two, also because the conditions are very extreme.
We had a question from Libby. What conditions are required for a seed bank? Feel free to follow up. I think you're asking about what the conditions of the seed storage itself would be.
So seed banks, so I'll just kind of distinguish first. In nature, we have soil seed banks where plants naturally have seed dormancy and the seeds can live in the soil for quite a long time. But then we're also able to collect seeds and take them off site to a physical seed bank that we've constructed. And in the seed bank, for instance, at the California Botanic Garden, what we do is, as Morrigan discussed, is we clean the seed to get rid of all the extraneous material. Then we dry the seed down to get to very low humidity, about like 15 to 20% humidity. And after taking away the moisture out of the seed, then we put it into basically a regular chest freezer, at minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Is about the temperature that we find we use in our seed storage. And keeping seeds dry and cold really extends their longevity. In fact, what some amazing things have been found about seeds that seeds that have been sort of unearthed from like tombs, and these seeds are thousands of years old, have been able to germinate because they were in these low humidity, cool, constant sort of conditions in the tomb. So that's very interesting about plants and seeds, is that they can live for a very long time.
Yeah, that is. Fred asked, how is the screw bean doing? Are you collecting seeds from it?
Yeah, so the screw bean is one, both the honey or yeah, the screw bean mesquite is a priority for seed collections, and then we'll, I believe, also be collecting from honey mesquite too.
Yeah, and so the screwbin mesquite is actually not faring well in the Amargosa or range wide. So we've seen large scale die off. So it happened in Shoshone several years back where there was high degree of mortality, like by and large, the majority of the screw bean is dead in the Shoshone region, and it's dying actively in the Ash Meadows region. There's a big decline of screw bean mesquite, and it's happening in many locations across its range. And there's a lot of research happening to investigate the cause of the decline of screw bean mesquite because it's a very important habitat plant. It's important, culturally. And it's just like very vital to these ecosystems. There has been some of the research has indicated that pathogens are playing a role in the decline of the screw bean, and climate might also be involved. But there's no sort of definitive answer as to why this decline is happening so extensively. And there's a lot of research around restoration of screw bean mesquite as well.
Uh, Ray, is the seed bank in Furnace Creek already built, or will you be using grant funds to build? Is that where they end up?
Yeah, great question. So, it's not already built. This is something that we're still in conversation with the Timbisha tribe about. Potentially, it could be built and we could support them to build something on the reservation at Furnace Creek. But yeah, this is something we're still in conversation about figuring out. But the funds could be used for that if that's something that they want. But the other option would be we could store the seeds at the California Botanic Garden and they would have like unlimited access to those seeds.
That is all the questions for now. You got a good handful. Oh, nope, just more praise for your
Thank
presentation.
you, everyone. And thank you, Scott and Naomi, for helping facilitate tonight.
And one person did ask if it was recorded. Yes, it was. At least it says it is. So I will be putting this up on YouTube probably sometime tomorrow morning. And yeah, you can rewatch and we'll post it up there so that people can share it and people who weren't here tonight can also watch it.
Yeah, I hope to see you all. Well, I guess I'm not actually seeing you, but I hope to see your names at the next seminar we have next month.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
All right, I'm gonna stop sharing.